matched each other and more than once. Our lips touched ears, cheeks and lips. Our bodies exuded magic as we pressed against each other. However, we both knew that I was still married and understood what that meant and what it didn't mean. So we spent a long leisurely evening, sipping wine and letting our eyes play flirtatious games with each other as we chatted. Brenda, as I said, is beautiful and passionate. However, the flip side of passion is jealousy, and I was almost certain that the thought of me fondling Miss Dee Charmaine would drive her crazy and ruin the wonderful time she was looking forward to spending with her new and lustful Mr. Hound. When I dropped Charmaine off at her apartment, she did me the favor of dropping a drop of her perfume on my shirt and smeared her freshly painted lips on my shirt, collar, neck and cheek, kissing me on the cheek. She wished me good night. Go get her, Tiger. We laughed as I got in my truck and headed home. It was barely 10 when I walked into the big chill. Where the hell have you been? None of your business, I replied nonchalantly. You never told me where you went with your anonymous Mr. Pound. I'd ask if you used condoms, but I don't care if you're rotting from the inside out anymore, because I'll never touch your lecherous cheating body again. So I don't care where you went, what you did, or who you were with. I had a wonderful time and I'm very grateful to you for it. What do you mean thank you? Don't you see, if you hadn't gotten the stupid idea to open our marriage, I never would have had the chance to get to know Charmaine better. What a woman, hot, hot, hot. So thank you, darling. Our Brenda screamed at the top of her lungs, making me wonder if the neighbor would call the police. You know, I hate that. Why do you think she was the first person I called? She stared at me stunned. What did you say? Once again, I seem to have overestimated your intelligence. Pull yourself together for a second. This isn't rocket science. You decided to reject me and rub my nose in it by dressing up for some anonymous, wearing clothes you've never worn for me. And you're surprised when I follow your lead. You renegotiated the terms of our marriage without my objection, and I just did what you did. The only difference is that I was honest enough to tell you who I was going out with. For some strange reason, you're too ashamed of your accomplice to name them. So I am rocket scientist. What exactly is your problem? Her sails were carried away by the wind. Brenda blew up in my face. She had two tears streaming down her face. I went on before she had had a chance to collect her breath. I'll guess you weren't as successful tonight as Kevin South had hoped. The air was filled with another squeal, this one with pathos, and she covered her lips with her hands. How do you know? Using the voice of a game show announcer, I said. You're dead once again. The inadequacy of your mind is on full display. Think for once you work in an office with at least 10 other women. Kevin is the biggest lover of girls you'll ever meet. Everyone there knows who's sleeping with who, and they talk about it. That's what you did. So brain, did you think for a second that you would be the exception for over a month? Several of your so-called friends have been telling me that you not only fell for Kevin's crap, but you started looking for him yourself. Oh, Google-eyed. One of your co-workers called it, who knows, maybe he dumped her for you. No rage and all that. Rumor has it he was going to make you his tonight. He even had a room at the Marriott. Apparently he's using the Marriott for the first night. After that it's the Motel 6 or the woman's house. You didn't know that? Her big eyes told me. She was shocked and appalled at being made to look ignorant, gullible, and such an easy target. She burst into tears. Oh, Rick, I'm so sorry. You're right. I'm such a fool. How can you stand being married to a stupid like me? Our Brenda, the good news is I don't have to stay married to your stupid ass. You'll be served here. Tomorrow after breakfast we're renting this house and we have 3 more months. So you can renew your contract or use that time to find something you like better. Where will you go? She asked in a thin voice. Charmaine said I could stay with her while I figure something out. She has a second bedroom she uses for an office. Once I file, she said we can discuss better terms. When I told her I'd file to tomorrow, she laid out those terms, the good ones. I can't wait to discuss them further. We'll just divide everything else that you and I own in half. You can now sleep with anybody you choose and stop putting up with a weak husband's nonsense. Kevin is worth it, I hope. Epilogue. I met some of the other husbands who had fallen victim to Kevin, nicknamed Mr. Hound. One night after dinner he discovered his car had been vandalized, windows broken, paint scratched, baby poop all over the seats, wheels stolen, and I forget what else. While he was surveying the damage, 3 masked unknown men dressed in all black silently robbed him and beat him badly. The police were puzzled as to why the robbers would go after his wallet and fake Rolex after his family jewels, but since there were no witnesses and the parking lot cameras were painted over, they had nothing to focus on. The 4 spouses of his victims were playing poker at one of their homes. After he recovered, he moved out of state. No one knows. Doesn't matter where Brenda moved. Found an apartment, but when she realized I was happily attached to Charmaine, she moved out of state too. I never saw her again. I stayed with Charmaine for a while longer, but we mutually decided that short-term pleasure didn't necessarily lead to long-term compatibility, so I moved out and found a townhouse closer to work. At the gym I regularly visited, I developed a friendship with a co-worker as I became older, wiser, and more fit. One thing paved the way for another. I was happy with a man who had loyalty in his heart and actual intelligence between his ears, as these moments typically do. What's your opinion about op? Thanks for joining us in our stories where revenge is served hot. Please consider subscribing to our channel to ensure your next chef remains loyal. Tune in for the next one to get your revenge appetite fulfilled. If you're below 18, hold on, it's not for the faint-hearted. We were in sync with each other, and more than once, our lips brushed each other's cheeks, ears, and lips. As our bodies pressed together, magic seemed to flow between us. However, we both understood I was still married and what that implied, and what it didn't. So we savored the evening, sipping wine slowly and letting our eyes engage in flirtatious glances while we chatted. Brenda, as I mentioned, is gorgeous and passionate, yet the other side of passion is jealousy. I was nearly certain that the image of me with my hands on Miss Dee Charmaine would drive Brenda crazy and ruin the wonderful time she anticipated spending with her eager Mr. Hound. When I dropped Charmaine off at her apartment, she left me a little gift, a dab of her perfume on my shirt and the smudge of her freshly painted lips on my collar, neck, and cheek. Kissing me on the cheek, she wished me good night. Go get her, Tiger. We both laughed as I got in my truck and headed home. It wasn't even 10 p.m. when I walked into the Big Chill. Where the hell have you been? None of your business, I replied, nonchalantly. You didn't tell me where you went with your mysterious Mr. Pound. I could ask if you used protection, but honestly, I don't care if you're rotting from the inside out anymore, since I'll never touch your lecherous, cheating body again. So I don't care where you went, what you did, or who it was with. I had an amazing evening, and I owe it to you. What do you mean, thank you? Don't you see? If you hadn't come up with the ridiculous idea to open our marriage, I never would have had the opportunity to get to know Charmaine better. What a woman, hot, hot, hot. So, thank you, darling. Brenda let out a scream so loud that I briefly wondered if the neighbors would call the police. You know I hate her. Why do you think she was the first person I called? I asked. She just stared at me, shocked. What did you say? Once again, I must have overestimated your intelligence. Take a second to get a grip, this isn't rocket science. You chose to reject me and throw it in my face by dressing up for some mystery man in outfits you've never worn for me. And you're surprised that I simply followed your lead? You renegotiated the terms of our marriage without my input, and I only mirrored your actions. The only difference is that I was upfront about who I was seeing, while you're apparently too embarrassed to name yours. So, genius, what exactly is your issue? Her confidence seemed to deflate entirely, and Brenda erupted in my face, tears streaming down her cheeks. I continued before she could catch her breath. I'll guess that your evening didn't go as well as Kevin South had hoped. Another wail filled the room, this one tinged with heartbreak, and she covered her mouth with her hands. How did you know? In my best game show announcer voice, I replied, you're dead. The inadequacy of her mind was on full display yet again. Think for once. You work in an office with at least 10 other women. Kevin's the biggest womanizer around. Everyone there knows who's sleeping with who, and they talk about it. That's what you did, so did you think for a single second that you'd be the exception? For over a month, some of your so-called friends have been letting me know that not only did you fall for Kevin's nonsense, but you began seeking him out yourself. One of your co-workers referred to you as Google-eyed for him. Who knows, maybe he dumped her for you. Word has it, he intended to make you his tonight. He even had a room booked at the Marriott. Apparently, he uses the Marriott for first nights, afterward, it's either Motel 6 or the woman's place. You didn't know that? Her wide eyes gave away her shock, appalled at her own gullibility, her ignorance, and how easily she'd been misled. Tears began streaming down her face. Oh, Rick, I'm so sorry. You're right, I'm such a fool. How can you stand being married to someone as foolish as me? Well, Brenda, the good news is that I don't have to. I'm not obligated to stay married to you. Tomorrow morning, you'll be served the divorce papers. We're renting this house, and there are 3 months left on the lease. You can renew the contract yourself or use that time to find something else you'd prefer. Her voice was barely a whisper. Where will you go? Charmaine offered to let me stay with her while I sort things out. She's got a spare bedroom she uses as an office. Once I file, she and I will discuss a more suitable arrangement. When I told her I'd file tomorrow, she even laid out some great terms. I can't wait to discuss them more. We'll split everything else that we own 50-50. Now you're free to be with anyone you wish and avoid putting up with a so-called weak husband's nonsense. Kevin is all yours. Epilogue. I ended up meeting a few of the other husbands who'd fallen victim to Kevin, now known as Mr. Hound. One evening after dinner, he found his car had been trashed, windows broken, paint scratched, baby powder smeared all over the seats, wheels stolen, and more. As he inspected the damage, 3 unknown men dressed in all black appeared, robbed him, and gave him a serious beating. Police were baffled as to why the robbers targeted his wallet, his fake Rolex, and a bit lower, but with the parking lot cameras covered and no witnesses, they had no leads. That same night, the 4 spouses of his victims were playing poker at one of their homes. Not long after his recovery, Kevin moved out of state, no one knows or cares where. Brenda found an apartment but, upon realizing how happy I was with Charmaine, also moved out of state. I never saw her again. I stayed with Charmaine a little while longer, but we both agreed that short-term pleasure didn't guarantee long-term compatibility, so I eventually moved out and found a townhouse closer to work. At the gym I regularly visited, I developed a connection with a colleague, growing older, wiser, and in better shape. One thing led to another, and I ended up with someone loyal, with real intelligence between their ears and a big heart. As these stories tend to go, what do you think of this one? Thanks for tuning into our stories, where revenge is best served hot. Please consider subscribing to the channel to ensure your next chef stays loyal. Tune in for more, and if you're under 18, brace yourself, these aren't for the faint-hearted.